Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us again for another Schweiger Live. I'm Andy Schweiger, and I'm joined here today with my dad, Fred Schweiger, founder and grower here at Schweiger Vineyards, as well as our assistant winemaker, Becca Wolf, who is self-quarantined at home through all this and is joining us today. So when we started this out last time, when we ended last time, we were just finishing with the planting of the vineyard and just growing grapes for other wineries. So this was the final block that we planted. This is our spring block. You want to say a few things about that, Dad?
Well, it's all Cabernet. We cleared that one though in 1990. There was a whole lot of fuss about people clearing in the mountains, and if you didn't finish it by 1991, no more mountain clearing. So we jumped on that one really quick. Sally, my wife, helped me lay that out. You'll see there's a few straight rows on the top. Other than that, it's all contour, 2% down slope, 2% into the hillside. It was really a lot of fun.
The majority of that is all Cabernet Sauvignon. Just these few straight lines here along the perimeter. That was the first of our Merlot.
Andy, could you show the slides?
Oh, thank you, Becca. We were on video the whole time. That is why, thank you.
That's why Becca's here. Come on, let's get going. Where are the slides?
Yep, that's
not a slide.
There we go. That's the slide now.
Okay.
So what we were talking about, let's back up. That photo is this spring block Dad was mentioning. And so this is all Cabernet Sauvignon, and this is just...
And the soils here are all just beautiful shale and loam. Just very, 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 a lot of good quality material that's in that soil that just really develops nice grapes that we don't have to fertilize at all. It's very nutrient.
Big kink in Dad's plan of making money selling grapes, some wise guy had to go off and decide to want to be a winemaker. So this was that fateful day in early spring 1988, back when college.
Well, this is our first shot at our barn that we built in 1980 something, and it was I was just going to be a square box with a shallow roof on it. I thought, wait a minute, why don't we just go ahead and, we know how to do this stuff. Let's get some higher ceilings and throw in a half dozen dormers. And that's the way it stood for about 3 or 4 years. And as you see other slides come into play, it's spent a whole winter in the open, and I put boiled linseed oil on that plywood floor to keep it all intact, and it worked out really well.
This building will continue to evolve as we go through the slides today. Fun going through old photos. Wanting to be different. This was actually my senior prom, and my friends and I decided, hey, let's not go to a restaurant. Let's go. And pulled together to help host and wait tables on us for that evening. Of course, a lot of winemakers who I had talked to before getting started shared with me the worst thing you can do is go to. So while I was still in high school, started applying, and my first winery job was actually at ZD working on the bottling line. This is shortly after I graduated high school, working at Gloria Ferrer Champagne Caves on the night shift. A lot of just either putting bins onto a conveyor or taking bins off the conveyor. Got my first forklift driving lessons there. And of course, a lot of pitchforking of stems and skins. Then while going to school, I got to work for 2 years at Joseph Phelps, learning more tricks of the cellar there, and was able to have Dad come by one day and see all the equipment and all the tanks and barrels we would need to be investing in someday. You can kind of see the look of dread and anticipation on his face there. So I'm still in school. 1991 rolls along, and we had some relatively new plantings out in what we today call our gate block. And that fruit was not under contract. came ripe much earlier.
Yeah, much earlier, 4 tons that didn't have a home. So I said, wait a minute, why don't we do this ourselves? You see in the slide, I rented a home destemmer, and that was one of our 2-ton valley bins that are there. And Jim, her husband, Paul in the background, shoveling. So it was
It's
pretty
actually,
much
that's Dinah.
is that Diana?
That's
Yep.
Dinah. There was no Paul here in 91.
Oh, well, okay, we get that straight now. Okay,
She was still in school too.
okay, fair enough. So we did this on our own, and we were not a bonded winery. And actually, to me, this dispels this whole thing about old vines stuff. It's a marketing ploy, quite frankly. I have some of that 91 left, and it turned out to be an incredible, incredible wine to this day. But it's really a lot of fun to make it. It kind of gave us a little experience. That was our very first barrel room. It was a building, you'll see it. I built it out 8 feet, up 8 feet, insulated it, and bought a residential air conditioner. I mean, this is low budget winery. And so to put it all together and to see now how it's all gone and grown.
Actually, so that room Dad built, so the slide we're looking at now is probably shortly into the 94 vintage. That first 91 vintage, Mom and Dad had sold their house in Kenwood. And so it was divided in half. And for that first harvest, this side was refrigerated and humidified for the barrels. In this half where you see barrels, they had furniture stored, and that side was dehumidified to store piano and various other furniture. Come 1994, this got opened up, and by 95 or 96, this actually expanded. We'll see that in pictures to come. Those first vintages, we were either renting equipment or our neighbors processed them there. But eventually we decided it was time to. So this was our first press. You want to explain the story behind finding this, Dad?
Well, this was a press that was for sale, located at south of Sequoia National Park. These folks bought it to do their lives. They didn't do it, so they had it for sale like $4,000. And you look at the price of presses out there, wow, that's pretty expensive. So this was a discussion on the phone like Tuesday. I said, I'll be down Saturday. He did, we did, and then he called back the next night and said, I got an offer for $6,000. Calls back the next night, I got an offer for $8,000. But he stood by his word. Sally and I drove down. I don't know if you got, there's another picture maybe, but yeah. We went down, and my tilt bed trailers, the road was so narrow, we're bouncing my trailer off of huge sequoia trees.
Yeah, I don't have any of those.
But the destemmer in the background, I traded for that.
Andy, I think we lost connection.
All right, there we are. There's that press again. So here's the legs that we added in, and I mentioned painting it white, and all back together again. What was amazing, the way this thing worked, it's not like your traditional basket press. This is a horizontal basket press, and this entire drum would spin, and there was a threaded rod, probably a 3-inch threaded rod made out of mild steel, a threaded shaft, and there were plates on either end of this. And as the drum would rotate, those plates would slowly come together, pushing the cake into the middle. And to break up the cap, there was actually mild steel chains connecting the two. So as you opened it back up again, it would break up the cap. Well, the first thing we did was remove those chains because it just would have beat the seeds to a pulp. That required a little extra labor that you'll see going on later on, because we actually had to get in there with oars and 2x4s just to bust it apart so we could get another squeeze out of it. That first few vintages, we were still on rock, and eventually we poured our own concrete crush pad to start working on. And there's that press all put back together again. So by now we're up to 1995, and this is our first hopper with our old distemmer, our first distemmer. And we would use this, Dad built this hopper to not only work for that distemmer, but also for this press. Now, it wasn't necessarily an OSHA approved, but we were all just doing what we can. So Paula actually was on a ladder down below. I was metering fruit in, and she is frantically pushing fruit to the left and the right as it falls in. Then by this time we had purchased some stainless steel valley bends, and, or had we had them already?
No.
About 96?
Yeah.
And so we were still using some of our mild steel that were painted with food grade white, but we were also fermenting in these. And dumping them was tipping up with a forklift and just doing your best to get as much out as you could without spilling anything. And the great thing was, you know, making wine always requires a lot of work, and starting out, we had a lot of great volunteers along the way. That's my friend from college, Marcus Zinder. Paula was always on hand. You know, her timing was great. She married me in 1994. Our first harvest was in 1994. So she's been here every harvest, spraying out, climbing up on presses, doing everything that needs to be done. More family along the way would be little sister Rachel. Rachel is Lois. Is Rachel your goddaughter?
Yes.
Okay, so, and explain Lois's relationship with you guys.
Well, Lois has been a good friend for many, many years, obviously, over 53. Sally was in her wedding, if I get that correct. And then we became good friends over the years, and just, you know, family growing up together. So Rachel decided I want to move to California. And so she helped us at the winery whenever she could. She might have worked here for a while too, I forget.
Yeah.
But anyway, she was having a lot of fun while getting the job done.
Now, unfortunately, we can't find the other side of the photo, but the photo on the right where Rachel's shirt is suddenly a very non-white color, that old press, as you can see, it sat the press pan sat very low, and there was a very tight screen for any berries that fell through. So I was on the other side using my hands just to get berries out of the way. And Rachel had leaned over to see what I was doing, and I splashed her a little bit. And so she reached in with her arm and splashed me back, thinking I was being a wise guy. The next thing you know, Dad has to come out and referee because Rachel and I are splashing each other in the press pan with press Cabernet. But no change of clothes. We just kept right on working. You know, we didn't have any wood metal barrel racks at the time, so everything was nestled. And in the early days, we were only too high. By the time, right before my 40th birthday is when I told Mom and Dad, I said, look, I turned 40 this year. For the health of my back is healthy now. Let's keep it healthy. Can we please buy metal racks? By the time we did that, we were actually stacking these racks 4 high, so practically up to the ceiling over my head. And here's Mom and Dad after a hard day of making wine with little Mindy in the background.
Yeah.
So moving ahead, this is bottling that 1991. So this is our first run at hand bottling. And we have John Jacobson. At first I thought that was Juan, but that's the guy from your church. He owns the glass place. Yeah, there's another photo of
Oh,
it.
it could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jim Richards there.
Okay.
And the fun thing is this turned into kind of a fun all hands on deck. There's Paula, her hair a little longer than that last picture. And this guy, Larry, he was a hoot. He had a very successful dental practice, retired, sold his practice, loved wine so much. He sold his dental practice, so he'd go to work at Chateau St. Jean full-time as a cellar rat. So I was working with Larry and said, hey, I'm bottling. Can anybody come up and help me? And anybody, family, friends, all gathered around to help with these first bottlings. 1994 Chardonnay was also bottled by hand. From an oxidation standpoint, I was very nervous, but the wine turned out great. We actually should have a slide in here coming up. We didn't have a tank to bottle that from. So you can't see it in this slide, but all that Chardonnay was in a 2-ton stainless steel valley bin. And Dad had cut in an 1.5-inch valve in the bottom of it. And as it got more and more empty, we would just tip it uphill with the forklift a little bit more because it was all bottled by gravity. And eventually, by the time the 94 Reds and the 95 Chardonnay was ready to bottle, we started hiring a mobile bottling line to come up and help us. So that was our first year, getting the 94 Cabernet, 94 Merlot, and 96 Chardonnay all bottled. So for a number of years, those were the only 3 varietals we did. And this was one of our first marketing events where we started going out and inviting people come up to taste our wines. And of course, you have to have food to go with those wines. And this was our first tasting room. Tasting room / lab / put things here while we're working. Our first tank we purchased used from Everdon Winery, and shortly thereafter we got our first dedicated stainless steel fermenter. This is an old dairy bin that Dad and a friend Jim went up to pick up, and that tank is still in use today downstairs in the barrel room. That's where we do all of our aerated rack eggs in.
And we didn't put that dent in it. We bought it.
We bought it dented. Becca, I don't think, has ever seen that dent. That's the side that faces the wall.
We hide that. It used to be a dairy. It was a creamer. It made ice cream, and I cut off all the top but made it a wonderful open tank. So the next shot.
This is our first brand new tank. Becca, this is tank D. And when Dad told me where we were going to put it, I was like, "You're kidding me." And sure enough, that crane picked that up and over the office. And, sorry, there were 3 in that one. Up over the office, and today sits right outside. Well, it would sit right outside where Bill's office is today. That's where our air compressor is now. I'm loving the gasping face on Becca. Also in the late 90s, we introduced a new wine, our port. 1997 was the first vintage of that. And that's a kind of a fun project. We'll talk about that more in a future episode.
Yeah, we're getting time here.
So there is the building as it existed up until the 90s. Mom and Dad lived upstairs from that
For 2 years.
For 2 years. Then Paul and I lived there for 2 years, and Diana and her husband lived there for 2 years. And then we realized we need more space. At that time, all the winemaking was going on in the back half of this building. So here is just a few days before we started excavation. I just had to put this in there because I just love that little yellow SV that Paul and I planted while we lived here. And all this got excavated out. So
beautiful cedar deck.
Beautiful cedar deck built to last forever. And there's still pieces of it around.
Oh, yeah, I use it.
So you want to talk through this and I'll flip through these quickly?
Well, there we are excavating. Rather than do a tunnel, we were able to just do a cut and cover. And here we are. Go ahead, you can go through this pretty quick. Cut and cover. We use insulated concrete forms. You'll see a lot of steel. You'll see a lot of concrete. About 1,250 cubic yards of concrete to make all this happen. Insulated concrete forms are great because it gives us an R50 value, and we can do it in 1/10 the time to build natural wooden formed walls. So that worked out really good. There we are. I have separate columns for them, and they poured those separately, and they're all real concrete, as you see it from down below. I don't know if we might have a shot of that.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is looking at date stamps. We started the clearing on April 24th, started the excavation April 24th, and here we are June 28th, pouring the first of the columns.
That's looking down into one of the columns. That kind of shows you how much steel is there.
So that is standing above one of the columns that was poured. So that's actually underneath where the lawn is now. So all that steel and concrete is under the lawn. And there's all the concrete going in.
That's all the shoring it took to support that concrete ceiling. And that's one that we're great do-it-yourselfers. And I bowed out of this one. I retained a shoring contractor out of Sacramento who does freeway work. And that you could hardly walk through that downstairs. And we didn't pour the downstairs slab because we knew there could be damage. So we just did all that first and then did the floor later.
These are all the glue laminate that arrived wrapped for the ceiling, and this is the ceiling all coming together. So now we are almost a year and a half later, almost complete. At this point, my lab was in the kitchen of what was Mom and Dad's and Paula's and my place. And then also in 2001, we got some new toys, and not just Jerry. We purchased a new press and a new distimmer in 2001, both much gentler. That's also the year that Dad's friend Bobby Baldy approached Dad about us making some Sauvignon Blanc for him.
Yeah, we approached him and said, hey, listen, you have good, solid contracts. I need to steal a ton of your fruit. Well, I don't know. I got it all committed. Well, listen, no, they're not going to miss a ton. That's where it started. He's a friend of mine that we've been friends for years.
So there's the Europress in the background. It was our Rauch distimmer, much gentler on the fruit, still had some stem jacks. All the fruit still needed to be metered by hand, but much lower to the ground. So that's Fiona metering the fruit in. Fiona had worked with me the 97 harvest at Kane, and she wanted to come back and work in the States a second harvest. So she came back in 01 and worked with us that year as well. Today she has her own winery, Tin Pot Hut in New Zealand.
Yeah.
That's our first intern. His first complete sentence was grapes go through pump into hose to tank make wine. I unfortunately don't have a picture because this is, I think, the same day when he figured out how to use a clamp. And I was pressing that day, and he decided to take the clamp off the press pan and got all the press wine from his chest down all over him. And he just came back into the tank room. I was shoveling out another bin. He's purple from belly button down and just said, "Daddy, I make wine." So in 2000, we actually decided to make a single vineyard designate Cabernet out of our gate block, but we didn't want to call it a reserve. We wanted to do something different with it. So we came up with the idea of calling it dedication. And that first vintage I dedicated to the four most influential men in my life: my dad, my two grandfathers, and Jerry, my son, born that year in 2000. However, I wanted to make it with the idea that creating this wine would not detract from our regular Cabernet. And the following years, 01, 02, I wasn't able to do that. I needed every last drop of that gate block to make the best Cabernet possible. And to this point, all we had been doing was Merlot and Cabernet, Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay. So I approached Dad and said, what do you think if we start growing some Cabernet Franc and some Malbec? And not sure how it would turn out. In 03, we purchased some Franc and some Malbec from Spring Mountain Winery and Paoletti, respectively. So our first vintage of dedication being a Bordelais style blend was the 2003. And by 2004, we were able to do it as an estate bottled wine. So from 04 onwards, all the grape varietals in dedication were grown here. So now we're probably 05 or 06, still have the Rauch and the Europress in the background. Really just a one-person show at that time. Of course, getting help wherever we could. And later on, we hired a gentleman from the East Coast, Joe Buswell. Joe had been an accountant and was tired of the hustle and bustle of accounting in Boston. So he worked with us for a couple of years. And then he decided he wanted to go into sales. Now, I was unhappy with the amount of stem jacks I was getting with this newer press. And so the following year, we purchased this setup from Carlson Associates. And this actually we've been so happy with, we continue to work with to this day. This hopper meters the fruit in very evenly. And so as long as the fruit is going at an even pace, we get nowhere near the stem jacks that we used to.
You should say the stem jacks is that portion of the stem that breaks off readily and stays attached to the berries.
So with the bottling of the 06 vintage, We had some issues with the people printing our labels, and they broke all of our dies, and we were going to have them redone. And so we decided, okay, not only you fired, but I've been wanting to dress up the label for a while, and with the destruction of those dies, we had to start over from scratch. So we partnered up with TAP, and their designers helped us create the new label. And a year after that, we met with a marketing consultant who said, look, you guys are a small 5,000-6,000 case winery, and you're doing Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Merlot, Cabernet, Port, dedication. 6 wines in one house, that's too many. You need to eliminate 3 of those SKUs. Well, a year later, we went the opposite direction. In 2009, our wine club had grown so much that we wanted to do something special for them. And the Cabernet Franc and the Malbec had really come into their own as varietals. And the family cuvee we had been doing for a number of years. And we were able to increase the production from both the Gate Block and the Monterre, which is right in front of my parents' house. So we started doing those as single vineyard selections. I hope everybody's hanging in there. As this slideshow came together, we probably should have done this in 3 parts. So here are new tanks that we had purchased for the winery. Now that we're selling wine, we reinvested a lot in our production facility. So bringing those tanks in with forklift and the tanks in the middle of the building. And then also, Dad was getting tired of paying high electricity rates. And so,
yeah, we checked into solar, and I always resisted putting them on our roof because to me it really messes up the architecture. And this area is where the spoils came out, or the soil from the when we built the barrel room, and so it was all engineered backfill, so nothing could ever be planted there or grown there. So I said, look, why don't we just put it right down here? And all the experts said, hey, that's a good spot for it. So it's almost paid for. It's been in there about 8 years now, and just works fine.
So we did, with the upgrade of the building, we did upgrade our tasting room. So for about 10 years, we did all of our tastings downstairs in the barrel room. Of course, we came to realize that people were coming from around the country, around the world, to come visit Napa Valley, and we took them down inside a hole. So right around 2010, Dad drew up some plans to extend the barn out a little bit and began construction on our new tasting room.
Kids, get off that wood. Your supervisor.
So those of you who visited in the past, it was just one large lawn. And I had finally gotten the lawn nice and green, and Dad said, okay, you have to tear up the lawn.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe how many hours are in the design of the shape of that entry. Mini. Oh, finished product already.
Yeah, it was a really quick and easy job.
The finished job.
Yeah. You know, the fun thing is we went along, like I said, this is not something you do by yourself. You're always pulling in friends and family to help. And this was actually, we had planned a family trip to Disneyland, and I came home and said, hey kids, I know it's break and we're supposed to leave for Disney in 2 days, but I have a tank I need to get down to Barrel, and we have to go to work tomorrow. So I had Paula and Jerry filling tag team, Megan scrubbing behind them. And it's fun that you can have kids willing to go to work and be clean and responsible, more or less. So in the years since, we started doing a lot of fun activities here at the winery, including doing stomps for guests during harvest, because we have nothing else to do that time of year. So if you've never attended one of our stomps before, guests come out and Becca, Dad, and I show them what goes into sampling the fruit, how we determine ripeness and when to pick. And then they get to stomp the fruit, and we always have how much fruit can they, how quickly can they get the fruit? Okay, I just got a warning, our internet connection is unstable. Can we still see and hear us okay?
Yep, still good for now.
Okay, good. We've also started doing lobster feeds about once a year. And part of the fun is we're always looking for new ways to innovate, to push the bar. These are some uniquely shaped barrel, French oak fermenters that we played with for a number of years. And while we did come to the conclusion that fermenting on French oak did make better wines for us, the shape of these were very impractical. So we still do order a certain amount of barrels every year with their heads removed so we can ferment in those. Then on the right side is an example of barrel trials we frequently do, where we actually invite friends and peers of other winemakers, and we taste through barrel trials where it's the same wine aged in different barrels. 2015 presented an interesting challenge to us. We had a lot of green shot berries, and fortunately our timing was just right. I took that aside and said, we are going to have a huge problem. We always do a careful job sorting out in the vineyard. We need to sort out in the field.
Well, let me explain what green shot berries. For every cluster of grapes, there had to be more than twice the amount of berries that, if had it been pollinated, would have been good berries. But they just stayed there, didn't get pollinated, and were like little green little berries the size of radish seeds. So consequently, this worked out to be a good solution for that year.
And our new disc.
With Andy in charge of running out on the farm. Nice.
And then that same year we got that disc, we also got this ATV. So if you haven't visited us recently, we now have this here ATV where Dad and I take people out for tours, groups of 4 to 5 at a time. Why don't you explain the tours, Dad?
Oh, well, what we do real quickly, we'll go taste the wine in the field that it was that the fruit came from. So here we are in a
Gate block.
Well, normally we'll go to Chardonnay first, Chardonnay on to Malbec, and then on up to Cabernet. And it takes about an hour and a half. It's just a fun trip that everybody really loves. We make it a fun and educational ride for everyone.
Then with the 2015, I went to Portugal and discovered a white port. And with the 2016 vintage, we released Napuro, which is our Chardonnay-based port style wine. And we've been doing that every year since then. Then in 2017, tea budded.
Yeah, things aren't unique enough around here. Yeah, let's have some Pinot Noir. Okay, so, but the beauty of this shot is what we're looking at is the growth from the bud that was slipped into the side of a trunk that was Chardonnay, a 15-year-old Chardonnay plant. And they're doing well. They're 3 years old now. We had a good crop last year, so we'll be, Pinot Noir is on the horizon.
So thank you everybody for tuning in. Sorry for the internet interruption. Hopefully everybody who was watching on Facebook Live was able to catch back up with us. Want to let you know what's coming up in the days to come. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. Pacific, we will be doing an online tasting of 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon. Club members, that should have been in most of your shipments that you just received. On Friday the 27th, we will be looking at 2015 dedication. Then some fun, different tastings coming up next week, 3 days. My friends with the men's a cappella group, Straight No Chaser, love wine. I've hosted tastings for them before shows. Well, I hosted a tasting for them once before a show, and they said from now on we do the tastings after the show. So Segi and David and I will be hosting these 3 tastings March 30th, April 1st, and April 3rd together. Those 3 tastings will pretty much only be available on Facebook Live just because we're trying to get everybody together. So that is our history part 2 for the day.
Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I know many of you are having to be shelter in place, and that's a tough time for everyone. But we just have to do it to keep the spread of this virus down. And so if this provides some entertainment for you, we're happy to do it, and it's a fun thing. Oh, that's a great shot. This is from a friend of ours who has a, what do you call them? Drone. And it's really nice. So, well, everybody stay well. Was there any questions that we need to know about, or just all kind of quiet out there? But shout out to Jeff Dorth, who's paying attention from time to time, John Jacobson, and a few other folks. Thanks for being with us.
Andrea, thank you for joining in again today.
Oh, you got a list?
And Bunny, thank you for joining in. Bunny was actually the one who said, you need to hook up with Zoom.
Oh,
Jeff Silverman, Becky Rills, thank you guys for tuning in today. And of course, Paula had to comment earlier on, she loved the picture of Screech. You may have seen a very fuzzy black and white cat. That was Paula's cat that followed her out from Arizona all the way out to California.
darn cat, I didn't see the pic here. There was a pic
Yeah, he was,
here?
yeah, on the press, on top of cases of
Oh.
wine.
No, I didn't, yeah, okay.
Screech was our version of Where's Waldo.
Yeah. She'd ride on my pickup truck to construction sites too. It's kind of embarrassing.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.